All right, folks. It's 4:01. I'm seeing three people. So let's wait another 2 minutes, please. All right, I'm gonna start. It's 4:04. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is finish up the digestive system. And then I'm going to lecture for a little bit. And then I will move on to answering the urinary questions. You might have noticed that I extended the time for the urinary turning because I thought I had made a turn-in on Wednesday morning, but apparently it didn't take for whatever reason. So now you have until tomorrow afternoon, early afternoon, to submit it. All right, that's it. Let's do what we need to do here. And we'll be starting reproductive system today, by the way. All right, so we got a decent way on Tuesday. So you got down to about slide 107, I think it was. Or purpose was large intestine. But all right, let's start here. All right, so we spoke about small intestine last time. We spoke about the parts of the small intestine the last time. We spoke about the things that increase surface area in the small intestine. We spoke about how substances are absorbed via the small intestine, right? Now, in order to get from the small intestine to the large intestine, we have to pass through a special valve. You guys already know the name of the valve. It is the ileocecal valve. And the ileocecal valve is between the ileum, which is the last section of your small intestine, and of course the cecum, which is the first part of your large intestine. So the ileocecal valve allows feces to leave the small intestine and enter the cecum. All right. Now, other parts of the small intestine will include the colon, which of course is the greater part of it. You'll see that so here's the cecum down here. And then coming up from the cecum, you have your, what we call the ascending colon. Now, I'm assuming it's fairly obvious to you what it's called the ascending colon. You can literally see it's going up, right? And then, of course, once it goes up, notice this is on the left side. So this is in the left lumbar region. And then the transverse colon runs from the left lower thoracic high lumbar and goes across to approximately the same region. Okay. Then now the descending colon comes back down to the lumbar region. We then have this S-shaped part. That's the sigmoid colon. That's because and it's called sigmoid, of course, because sigmoid refers to S-shape. Then from there, it goes down into the rectum, okay? So those are the major parts of the small intestine, the major functional parts. Now, I did not mention the appendix, right? Not because it's not a part of the large intestine, but of course because the appendix itself has a more immune system function. It really doesn't have anything to do with absorption or processing food or anything like that, right? So that's why the appendix is left out. Now, that said, what lines your large intestine? No surprise to you, at least I hope it's not. We have simple columnar epithelium with goblet cells, which is basically the same as what lines your small intestine, right? And of course, just like in the small intestine, you're going to have mucus, because you always have mucus, right? Now, the mucus protects the intestinal walls and holds fecal matter together. Now, here's the thing. When the feces leave your small intestines, they are not very well defined. They're not very well held together. By that I mean, they have the consistency of what amounts to thick pancake batter, if you can put that in mind. So the feces come out like thick pancake batter, sometimes a little thicker than that, semi-solid, but usually somewhere around there, and enter your large intestine, right? So the mucus in the large intestine helps to hold your pancake poop together, if you want to put it that way. So it's easier to push through your large intestine. Now, the good thing is as you go, you absorb water from the feces, and that makes the feces get a little harder, a little more structured. So it becomes easier to move the feces as it passes through the large intestine, right? Now, your large intestine also contains sodium bicarbonate and that helps to neutralize acids. Now, you expect, of course, by this stage, the acidity of the chyme that entered the small intestine should have been dealt with, right? Now, keep in mind, though, that in some cases, let's say, for example, you have diarrhea. If you have the diarrhea is severe enough, you can actually cause the duodenum also to rapidly move the chyme through all the way down to the small intestine, which means when that feces enters the large intestine, it is still mostly, I mean, it's going to be less acidic than it was before, because of course you're adding other substances to it, but it is still going to be acidic. That's why sometimes, I mean, this happens to people, they have diarrhea, they use the toilet, and they feel a burning in the anus. That burning is not just muscle strain. That burning might be because of acidity of the diarrhea coming out. Okay, so that is the reason why you have sodium bicarbonate producing cells to neutralize any sort of potential acidity. All right, and if you've ever gone through the fire, the burning sensation, you know what I'm talking about. Some people talk about, oh, you're going to have like food with plenty of pepper in there. And when you go to the toilet afterwards, it's so terrible. You have to remember that pepper is an irritant. It will irritate the lining of your digestive tract and cause diarrhea. And once again, the diarrhea comes out before you can neutralize the acid. So you get that burning sensation as you try to pass it out. Anyway. And of course, in addition to that sort of thing happening, you also need that bicarbonate ions to help to neutralize acids that will be produced, of course, by the flora and fauna of your large intestine. Okay? So you will have bacteria in the large intestine that live there quite happily, and they break down some of the undigestible substances from your diet, which is useful to us because it usually means some nutrients are released at that time, right? So
Yes,
there
sir.
now we have two reasons for having sodium bicarbonate, right? To help to
Yes, sir.
control acidic feces coming in from when you're having diarrhea, and also to help control the acidity generated by bacteria that live in your large intestine.
So, sir, question.
Now, we did not look at the slide of large intestine this week, unfortunately. I think y'all kind of tired of the drawing thing. Unfortunately, we do have more drawings next week. We're drawing reproductive system next week. I do believe that's 3 drawings. But if it makes you feel better after that, there'll be a break from the drawings, right? Anyway,
Yes, sir.
so this is the setup of your large intestines. And I want you to remember how different this looks from your small intestine. Wait, where is it? Right? How different it appears from your small intestine, how different it appears from your stomach, right? The point I'm trying to bring across is that just based on the structure, especially of the mucosal layer, you should be able to identify a section that comes from the stomach, section that comes from the small intestine, large intestine, esophagus, right? So please be aware of what they look like. Now, you will notice here that we have intestinal glands. Why, whenever there's peppiness, people say we should drink milk. Oh, I see what you mean. All right. Let us say you eat something with a whole of scotch bonnet pepper in there, and your mouth has to burn you. Drinking water is a waste of time. Why? Because capsaicin, which is the chemical in the pepper, is insoluble in water. You will take a mouthful of water and all you do is spread the burning sensation around the mouth. But when you drink milk, there's a lot of fat in milk, and the capsaicin will dissolve in the fat and be washed away from your mouth when you swallow. That's why they say drink milk. I mean, technically, if you're really desperate, you could drink, put like some coconut oil or vegetable oil in your mouth and swish it around, then spit it out. That would actually work better than the milk, right? Because the milk only has some fat, whereas vegetable oil is pretty much all fat, right? So yeah, if you ever consume something super hot and you just feel like you're dying, you can put a tablespoon or two of oil in your mouth, switch it around, and that should help a lot. Or drink milk. It doesn't work quite as well, but you won't be left with the taste of oil in your mouth either, right? So pick your battles. Anyway, so notice intestinal glands, and please note it looks very, very similar to the stomach wall, right? Very similar. But notice you have these very big, obvious blood vessels running up into the mucosal layer. Because of course, large intestine is also a place of absorption. You're not going to get these in the stomach because you remember you're not really absorbing anything much in the stomach. So once you see these blood vessels, you must know this is not the stomach, even though this looks like it, right? All right. So it mentions intestinal glands. It mentions that they have simple columnar epithelium lining the intestinal gland pits, right? Now, as it says here, once absorption has taken place in the ileum, the undigested food is pushed into your large intestine, remember, via the ileocecal valve. And the purpose of your large intestine, mainly, not only, but mostly, it is for the reabsorption of water, right? And remember, as you're pulling water out of the feces is becoming more harder, it's becoming more structured. So it's easier and easier to push the feces along, right? It mentions here that the feces maximizes surface area for absorption of water by being long and folded. And of course, mucus is secreted to lubricate the passage to make moving the feces easier. And as this one you know already, a diet rich in fiber helps clear out waste. All right, why? When you consume a lot of water and fiber, here's what happens. Well, let's start with the fiber. I don't know if you've ever seen anybody make like mud bricks. It's kind of a weird thing to ask. But if you see, like you say, like I remember watching this documentary about Egyptians, and it showed how Egyptian people made like bricks for their houses. They get like a big pile of mud, right? Just pour water in and make a big old mud pile. Then they'd go to the field and get straw. You know, basically dried grass, and they'd sprinkle in there and they'd walk around in there to mix the straw in with the mud. And if once they put enough straw in the mud, they can take the mud up now and shape it into bricks. And these bricks will hold their shape because of the straw on the inside. The straw is structural. It helps to hold it together. It's the same thing going on here. When you add all of the fiber, and like grass and straw is made out of fiber, it enters the feces and helps to give the feces structure. So it's easier to move the feces out, okay? Because they're holding the proper shape, their shape more efficiently, right? So of course, if you have a diet with very, very little fiber in there, you will find yourself getting constipated a lot more because it's harder to move the feces along because it doesn't have the proper shape. And what will actually happen is that if the feces stays in your colon too long, you will actually pull too much water out of it. And as you pull all of this water out of the feces, what happens to it? Get tough like rock stone. So when try to pass that, you're in the bathroom, you feel like you're struggling with your life, but you're struggling with the devil for your life, right? Because you're literally passing what's almost like a stone from your rectum, okay? So here's the thing. It does mean that if you are constipated, what you should do is consume large amounts of fiber and large amounts of water because the excess water will actually be reabsorbed into the hard feces. You're not going to be able to get the fiber into the already toughened feces, but at least you'll be able to absorb water into it, which will loosen the stool a bit so it's easy to pass out, right? So I'm just giving you some advice for constipation, You're welcome. All right. Now, why does a diet rich in fiber reduce the risk of colon cancer? Now, a personal question I can ask is this. Well, it's not even personal, in your opinion. So I want you to tell me, in your opinion, how often per week should somebody pass, well, should they defecate? What is the number that's normally think? What's the normal number of defecations per week? What do you think, Brittany? Tanya says every day Brittany Cunningham asks a question.
Sir, twice a day?
Not you, Simone, Brittany.
Oh.
Hold on, is my mic off? Give me 1 second. Oh my goodness. Speaker them lock up. My apologies. My speakers are locked. All right, try again now. Sorry. All right, so let's go again. Brittany, what's Brittany saying?
Say answer every day, sir.
Okay. Sorry, I wasn't hearing him. My speakers were off. And I think there was another. I think it was Simone that was saying every day too, if I'm not mistaken.
Sir, twice a day?
Damn. Now sir, not too much.
But don't that's too much,
Sir,
sir.
once every
Sir,
day.
If you're healthy, you have to go twice a day.
Keeping in mind that your intestine is not supposed to be a slip and slide, right?
You go
All right,
having your
but let me
system
tell you, it actually has a
defecating
lot to
2 times.
do with your diet. Technically, twice a day might not be unhealthy, right? So let's say, for example, you eat a lot of greens, a lot of vegetables, right? The greens and the vegetables are loaded with plenty of water and they're loaded with plenty of fiber. So if you are somebody who consumes, and by the way, just because I say vegetables, sometimes people think of like flour. Flour is a totally different thing. Flour might come from a plant, but it ain't a vegetable. Okay? So if you're consuming lots of high fiber foods, you will find yourself defecating multiple times a day, twice a day, which is fine. But for people who eat, it's just standard Jamaican diet, once a day, or on the long side of normal, once every other day is okay, right? But the longer the feces sits in your colon, in your rectum, remember the feces contains waste products that can actually damage your cells. So the longer it takes for the feces to make its way through your colon and leave, the more you've exposed the lining of your colon to chemicals that can cause damage to the cells. So if you are finding yourself defecating less than once every other day, you need to get it looked at. And 90% of the time, it's because you're eating trash. Let's be perfectly honest, right? You can't eat patty and drink juice and drink Pepsi all day, every day. That's not good for you, right? Some people, the only time they say anything green on them plate is when it's dyed that color. Can't work, right? So your body needs to get in the fiber so it moves out the feces. When was it? Last year or the year before last, I asked the same question. And one girl, her response was once a week. For her, once a week was normal. Right? Ask her about her diet. She said she and vegetables are not on speaking terms. So that makes sense, right? All right. Now, bacteria. Bacteria are very interesting. Normally, when we talk about bacteria, we make it sound like it's something bad, right? But there are a lot of very important bacteria that are in your large intestine, okay? You have bacteria that actually help to release vitamins from the food you consume. It helps to produce B complex vitamins, helps with the, once again, release vitamin K from your food, which of course has to be absorbed. You have a certain makeup of vitamins in your intestines that is required for your immune system to function properly, right? Now, here's the thing. I don't know if any of you have ever had taken antibiotics. They're so ubiquitous nowadays. I'd be surprised if anybody here has not taken antibiotics, right? They're all over the place. Antibiotics, when they're first created, were supposed to be a last measure. Nothing else is working. Bring out the antibiotics. Let's see if we can save this person, right? These days, of course, anything wrong with you, you get antibiotics. You have a cold, for God's sake, and people are giving you antibiotics. And I know you all know that a virus is not affected by an antibiotic. But I've heard too many stories of doctors prescribing antibiotics to people, right? When they have the sniffles. Absolutely insane. Then add to that the fact that this stuff ain't cheap, right? Now, what's the big deal if you're taking antibiotics even if you're not supposed to? It has to do with the way antibiotics work. Antibiotics kill bacteria. Good, bad, ugly, don't care. So when you take a course of antibiotics or repeatedly take courses of antibiotics, they run through your digestive tract and kill off all the good bacteria, right? The ones that are helping you to make B vitamins and K vitamins and all of these things, right? When you do that, you have now cleared out the environmental niches. Remember niche from when you're doing ecology? That now means there's a chance that another type of bacteria from your environment, you're swallowing it in the food, can make its way to your large intestine, and there's no competition for space. It now sets up shop. Now you have bad bacteria breeding in large intestine. All of a sudden, you start to have gastritis, gastrointestinal problems all the while. You wonder what is going on. It is because you don't have bad bacteria where you used to have good because of the antibiotics. So always use antibiotics very sparingly, right? Now, hopefully that makes sense to you, right? They're a great thing, but even great things require some moderation, right? All right.
Yes, sir.
Now, this, of course, is just a summary of the digestive system itself. So read through at your leisure, right? Now, large intestine, last bit. It says it produces large amounts of water and electrolytes when irritated. What does this amount to? It amounts to diarrhea, right? I mentioned that you can have diarrhea in the small intestine too, right? Which, of course, it gives you that acidic chime getting washed down. But you also get diarrhea in the large intestine as well. And you do produce large amounts of very watery diarrhea because of all the water being added to the diarrhea. But you're also filling the diarrhea with electrolytes, okay? Now, when you're losing all of this very watery diarrhea, remember you're losing water, but you're also losing salts in the form of electrolytes. So you have diarrhea and you're becoming dehydrated. If you guys have heard of cholera, you must have heard of cholera. That's a perennial killer. To this day, cholera is still killing people all over the world. Cholera is a disease you get from the consumption, of course, of water contaminated with the cholera bacteria, right? That cholera bacteria severely irritates the lower small intestine and the large intestine and causing the worst diarrhea you can imagine. How bad is the diarrhea? You usually get to the point where blood is coming out. That's how bad. All right? And it kills people by causing severe dehydration due to all the water is stored. Okay? So if you ever contract cholera, you need to drink and drink and drink and drink. And not only drink a whole lot of pure water, you have to add salts back to what you are taking in. Obviously, if you have severe diarrhea, the last thing you want is put food in your stomach, but you still need the salts. So if you have diarrhea, if you know anybody who has diarrhea, they need to be drinking things like Lucozade and Gatorade in addition to the water in order for them to remain functional. If not, then they can cholera can give you the diarrhea so severe that in many cases we've found children under the age of 3 can die in 24 hours. So your baby starts show symptom 10 o'clock today, and by 11 o'clock tomorrow, then dead. That's how serious cholera can be because of the severe diarrhea, right? Keep that in
Sir,
mind. Yes.
I remember you saying last class that you can add something. Where's that, like a homemade Gatorade? They say you can add salt or what else?
Yeah, if you,
Salt, like
I
sea
mean,
salt.
it's obviously not going to be as good, right?
I know.
But here's the thing. The main salts you're losing through sweat are sodium and chloride, which makes sense. They're the main salts in the diet. You also lose some phosphorus as well. We can't really help with that one, right? But if you take 8 ounces of water, right, put a few pinches of salt in the water, add a teaspoon or two of sugar, mix them all up. That is your home brew Gatorade, right? And if you want to be really fancy, you can take a pinch of Epsom salt and dissolve in there. Yes, you can take Epsom salt orally, not gonna do you nothing, right? And Epsom salt has magnesium in there, which is on some phosphorus, which so that enriches that homemade Gatorade until it's almost as good as the one you buy at a supermarket, right? So if you're doing a lot of heavy competition and things, you drink something like that to keep yourself going. If you have diarrhea, you drink something like that to keep yourself from becoming dehydrated, right? Think about it. You have severe diarrhea and they give you salt, rehydration salts. Why are you eating rehydration salts? You're losing water, you give the people them salt because you need the water, you need the salt to function, right? Not only that, the salts change the osmolarity of your blood, making it easier to hold water in the blood when you're dehydrated. We'll talk more about this when we do the electrolytes part, right? So yeah, rehydration salts are an important thing, right? All right, anyway. 2 slides left, good. So large intestine, of course, produces large amounts of water and electrolytes. We'll explain why. And the movement of fecal matter is due to peristalsis, segmentation and contraction of muscle pads. So once again, you're moving the feces along, you're doing segmentation, peristalsis, both of which are not under your control. They're autonomic. The only time now when you decide to move things along is when that feces gets to the rectum. And then is when you start struggling with it, right? Lactose intolerance. I don't know if you've ever heard of this term lactose intolerance, but it is an extremely common thing. As a matter of fact, 40% of Jamaicans are lactose intolerant, right? Generally speaking, adults become lactose intolerant, right? The idea is that lactose is milk sugar. When you're young, it makes perfect sense that you want to be able to produce as much lactase as possible. So if lactose is a sugar in milk, lactase, of course, must be the enzyme that breaks down that sugar. So children will have a lot of lactase, right? So it mentions here decreased ability to digest lactose because as an adult, you lose the ability to produce lactase. Whereas in children, they have plenty. And as you lose the ability to break down lactose, right, with the enzyme lactase, that lactose sugar goes into your large intestine. And then bacteria in your large intestine are like, what? Free sugar. And they ferment that sugar down nice. And as they ferment the sugar down, they convert it and they release carbon dioxide, methane, hydrogen sulfide, even some hydrogen. You must have seen like on TV or hell, maybe you saw it in real life, where somebody farts and somebody lights it with a lighter or something, and see a big gush of flame. That happens. It's a real thing, right? It is a real thing. So when you're lactose intolerant, you don't get a flame, the flamethrower come out of your backside, right? Just burn down the whole house because you're producing that much gas. It also means that when you pass gas, it smells so bad that you can see people's eyebrow hairs start falling out, right? Because of so much hydrogen sulfide gas in there. And of course, because of all the gas, people who are lactose intolerant feel very bloated. It's actually painful. Anytime you try to bend down or anything, you can feel the pressure. It's not fun, right? Now, so symptoms, abdominal bloating, cramps. I didn't mention cramps. Of course, you pass gas, that's flatulence. Diarrhea, of course, because all of that is going to irritate the lining of your large intestine, and you're going to get lots of very watery diarrhea, and it is going to be loud because you can imagine you're removing that feces and all the farting sounds coming along with it, right? So when somebody is lactose intolerant, if you know somebody in your life who's lactose intolerant, if you spend enough time around them, you will realize it. You'll be able to hear it through the bathroom door, right? You also get nauseous. No surprise there, right? As mentioned here, you get borygeny, which is stomach rumbling, right? Now, here's the thing about and I'm gonna move on. Here's the thing about lactose intolerance. If you consume a lot of milk-based products in your diet, right, you get some resistance to lactose intolerance. So let's say you're somebody who eats a lot of cheese, drink a lot of milk. From your child, you've been doing it. Even as an adult, it will carry forward, right? So your diet is important in regards to this, right? That said, if you're an adult and you stop consuming dairy products for a while, let's say this says, oh, I want to go on a dairy fast. Some people do it. It's all right, 6 months, no dairy. Do you know 6 months? Your body decides you're no longer into the milk thing. It stops making lactose. You come back and try consuming the milk. And of course, boom, lactose intolerance, right? Now, some ethnic groups are more likely to be lactose intolerant than others. For example, Japanese people, over 90% of them are lactose intolerant. There's a reason why the cheese is not a very popular thing in Japan. They literally can't manage it, right? Whereas lots of Europeans, Germans, all those kind of people, they can consume cheese all the days of their life because their diet is heavily inundated with cheese. Can you imagine if somebody from Italy was lactose intolerant? How could they live? They couldn't eat no pizza, no calzone. You couldn't even have spaghetti and meatballs because they're not gonna have cheese in the sauce, right? So if you have a diet heavy in these things, generally speaking, that population will evolve to continue to produce lactose long after they're adults, right? Anyway, reproductive system. We want to start with the female one. Yeah, let's start with the female one. Why not? Female reproductive system. By the way, this is from Moodle, right? Obviously, and I'm sure it's obvious to everybody, that you're going to need to know how to label the thing, right? This is a very CSEC diagram. I have no doubt everybody has seen this one before, right? So it's going to match this up on no problem, right? Now, this here is the same as this. It only has a few more labels on it. And I'll get to the nitty-gritty of the labels in a little bit. Just please ensure that you can label all the relevant structures on this diagram here, and you'll be perfectly fine, right? Now, so this is a lateral view of the female, or a mid-sagittal view of the female reproductive system. This one now is an anterior view, okay? Now, I know you've seen both of those before, so I don't need to run through this, right? Just make sure you refresh your memory, right? Now, human beings have structures called primary sex organs, right? Now, normally when I say to somebody a primary sex organ, you hear primary, so you think, oh, it must be the most important, and you hear sex, so automatically what comes to mind? Penis, vagina, which is completely wrong. your primary sex organs are not those, not penis, not vagina. They are not primary. Your primary sex organ refers to the part of the reproductive system that makes gametes, right? That makes the egg, makes the sperm. Therefore, your ovaries, the ovaries are the primary sex organs, right? Not vaginas, so many people seem to think, right? So many people that's all they can seem to think about. Anyway, so ovaries, primary sex organ. And the egg, of course, is the female sex cell. Sorry, 1 second here. Technical difficulty. It's not working. All right, I'll figure that out later. So primary sex organ, right? Sorry, ovaries, of course, eggs, as everybody knows, the eggs are haploid. They have half the number of chromosomes as the person. This is to allow for sexual reproduction. We all know that, right? Then now you have the fallopian tubes, also known as the oviducts. And they, of course, are designed to transport the ovum to your uterus, right? You know, all right. Let's just use the diagram as we're running through this. So here we have our ovaries. Remember, 1 second here. I want this to be bigger. What's going on? One second here, having a little technical difficulty. Okay, so we're back. So let's make it a little bigger, then we can run through it together. All right, so female reproductive system, take 2. So your ovaries, remember, are your primary sex organ. I remember that is how we write primary, 1 with a little 0 up top. They are the ones that produce the eggs or the ova. The eggs, of course, are released from the ovary and then they enter the fallopian tubes, right? Now, I want to point out something. As I go along, I always try to point out things to do with the human body that make no logical sense, right? That could have been done better. So, for example, you remember the ampulla, the hepatopancreatic ampulla, how both of them come down into one tube, and that one tube leads into the diaphragm. But that stupid tube is easy to block. So some people die from it. Your ovaries also have a problem. So here your ovary, and here's the fallopian tube, as you know. Let's call it FT. Right? Coming off of the fallopian tube are these little finger-like projections here. Right? Called fimbriae. Right? So when you look at the end of the fallopian tube, it kind of looks like an arm with the fingers dangling, right? But of course, within the fimbriae, you're going to have the passage. So it's kind of like that's the fallopian tube there, and here the fimbriae coming off of it. It's like I'm drawing an octopus. Right? Just to give you an idea. So the idea, of course, is that the egg here, when it's released, so here's the ovary, will go into the fallopian tube here. Okay? Now, do you notice something ridiculous? Maybe it doesn't look ridiculous to you. uterus, sorry, the uterus. The fallopian tube is not attached to the ovary. This is ridiculous. Why is that ridiculous? Because when that fertilized egg is released, yes, it normally goes this way, and the fimbriae are muscular, so they're like giant cilia, and they do this wave action, which helps to pull the egg towards the fallopian tube. But sometimes the egg can just go wandering about, right? So it's getting pulled towards your fallopian tube, and then who knows, maybe it's moving in, and you just sneeze, or you buck your toe, or whatever it is, and then it just veers off and goes floating on the outside, and it goes this way. Now, if the egg is not fertilized, that's not bad, because it just go and degenerate somewhere else. Not a big deal, right? But sometimes, because, of how stupid the system is, the egg will actually dip down into the fallopian tube, right? Just long enough for sperm to come along and fertilize it. It then gets washed out again and goes, yes.
So isn't it the process, the same process ovulation? Ovulation, you call?
No, I'm saying when you ovulate, when women ovulate, they release the egg from the ovary, and the egg is supposed to go down the fallopian tube. But the fallopian tube is not attached to the ovary. So there's a space between the ovary and the fallopian tube. And because there's a space, you have these fimbriae, which are supposed to help to pull the egg towards the fallopian tube. But they're not grabbing the egg and pulling it in. They're doing like a wave motion, sort of, like when you move your hand through water to make a current. That's what they're trying to do. And what I'm saying to you is that sometimes it doesn't work out and the egg escapes and floats away. So that basically means that month, when the woman is having her menses, she will not have produced any eggs to be released to the body. And sometimes she's very bad looking. The egg will actually enter the fallopian tube near the top, get fertilized by a sperm, then that egg now gets washed out of the fallopian tube. Because once again, there's this space between the fallopian tube and the ovary where the egg can escape. Now, this escaped egg is a menace. It is fertilized, right? And because of that, it can find itself somewhere else along the reproductive system, and it will attach there, right? And when that happens, you get a ectopic pregnancy. All because the fallopian tube and the ovary are not properly connected. Okay? So bad evolution. And is an ectopic pregnancy dangerous? Well, I don't know. I mean, let's see. If it's left untreated, it will kill you. Unless it miscarries before you die. And notice, I didn't say it might kill you. I said it will. If you get a fetus developing outside of the uterus, as it grows in size, it is going to start severely damaging the surrounding organs. Right? And if it gets big and dies and starts to deteriorate inside the mother, it can cause septic shock and she will still die. Right? So remember, ovary and fallopian tube not directly connected. Instead, you have a space between them and the fimbriae that are supposed to create a current like in the water, to pull the egg into the fallopian tube. Sometimes it works great. Other times you get the ectopic pregnancy, which will, of course, kill you. Not so great, right? All right. Now, assuming no ectopic pregnancy occurred, the egg, of course, travels down the fallopian tubes. And eventually that egg enters the uterus, right? Uterus is a very muscular organ. it is, of course, the site of implantation. And this is where the fetus will develop into an older fetus, really. The reason I say it that way is because as long as it's in the body, we call it a fetus. It could be 9 months old, 10 months old. Until it is born, it's not a baby, it's a fetus, right? Now, once you leave the uterus, the end of the uterus projects into the vagina, and we call this projected part here, of course, the cervix, right? And the cervix has a little hole in there, which of course allows sperm to go in. It also allows menstruation to go out, okay? Now that hole can be plugged. As a matter of fact, most of the time, the cervix has a hole in it, and that hole is plugged with mucus. The reason it's plugged with mucus is because if you leave a door open, the wrong people will walk in. There's a reason why we have doors and locks. If you leave the cervix open, considering that the vagina is exposed to the outside, eventually bacteria will make their way invade the vagina and enter the cervix and cause all kinds of problems. So to prevent that from happening, the cervix itself is closed off, right? So here we have our cervix, and the hole in it is the os cervix. Usually this hole is plugged with mucus, okay? Now, if it's plugged with mucus, it means the woman can't get pregnant because sperm can't get in there either. All right? I'm sure you all know this already. That translates, of course, into something simple and hopefully obvious. Only certain times during the month can a woman actually get pregnant, right? Only at specific times. Just before ovulation occurs, remember ovulation, the release of the egg, the mucus blocking the cervix starts to dissolve and it moves out of the way. Why is it doing that? Because the egg is now in the fallopian tube waiting to be fertilized, and it needs some sperm to accomplish that. So if a woman has sex during the time when the cervix is open, then she can get pregnant, but not pretty much never otherwise. And that realistically is about a 3-day period during the month, right? Now, when assuming the egg is unfertilized, it of course leaves the uterus via the cervix. Remember, the os cervix is the hole, and then it travels down the vagina. Vagina, of course, is going to be also known as the birth canal, and it is the site of sperm deposition, right? Now, eventually, you end up at the vaginal opening, and at the opening to the vagina, you're going to have this big gland here called a greater vestibular gland. And the purpose of this gland is to produce mucus. So we're always making mucus in the body. Why are we making mucus this time? Because that mucus acts as a lubricant during sex, right? So it's kind of important. You will also note, of course, that the outside now of the female reproductive system is made up of several flaps, right? Or I guess another way of saying is lips, right? So the word labia means lip, right? So for you understand why we have the labia majora, so major lip, and labia minora, which is the minor lip. The labia minora is the first lip that you'll find on the outside, and it closes off the entrance to the vagina, okay? Now, around the labia minora, you'll have the bigger one, and this is the one with the hair on it. Let's draw some hairs on it. Nice curly hair. This is the one now that covers over the labia minora. It's there to stop, insects and dirt and bees from getting up into your business. Pretty much, right? All right. I will mention the periurethral gland. We're not going to worry so much about that right now. But I do want to mention that the female urethra is not a part of her reproductive system, right? And the female urethra, as you can see there, it exits above the vagina itself. Some people believe, heck, I know girls who thought they peed through their vaginas, which is a bit weird. One would think you'd have peed enough time to notice the difference, but who am I to judge? So the urethra is above the vaginal opening. And then now above that, you will find the clitoris, right? Now, the clitoris is another one that I think, evolutionary speaking, doesn't make any sense. The purpose of the clitoris is, I didn't not catch that.
I was asking why you say it don't make no sense.
It's position, where it's positioned is stupid. The purpose of the clitoris is to increase sexual stimulation. So why you put it up as a? You should put it right as a. Should be right here, so. Right? So that's during the act
Sorry,
of,
inside. Where's it supposed to be, sir? On the inside?
if I was designing, I would put it right as well. Yeah.
Okay.
No, think about it. If it was right here, so, right? That means you could have all problems solved. If you see what I'm saying. If not, let's move on. Maybe too young for this conversation. Moving on. Now, so we did fallopian tubes, we did eggs. All right. Uterus, cervix, good. All right. Now, I mentioned this about the clitoris. The clitoris itself is made up of the same material as the head of the penis, which is erectile tissue. As a matter of fact, the male's glands, which is the head of the penis, forms with the addition of testosterone during fetal development. If there is not enough testosterone during the development of the male, they're born with a clitoris. Which is why sometimes you'll have males that are born and they look indistinguishable from females. It's because of the very, very low levels of testosterone they get exposed to during their development. That's why sometimes they're born, their sex is indistinct, you can't tell, right? Hormone issues. All right, let's talk about oogenesis, making eggs. Now, in females, oogenesis is extremely complicated in comparison to that of males, okay? First of all, the production of eggs in females doesn't even start after you're born. It starts before you're born. It starts in the second trimester, right? Everybody knows trimesters, 3 of them, right? But do you know the whole trimester thing is just made up? By that I mean, there is nothing so distinct about the physical appearance of a fetus that allows you to say, well, this is in the first trimester. That's in the very, 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 very early part of the second trimester. They look the same. But of course, we draw a line and say, okay, every 3 months, we're expecting, generally speaking, this amount of development, right? So remember, it's not a hard and fast rule. We just decided to split it up like that, right? Our distant ancestors never don't do anything with no trimester. Anyway, in the second trimester of life, you have these special cells called germ cells, okay? And they lead to the production of the oogonia. Notice here the oogonia are diploid. Now, before I go any further, do you all remember haploid and diploid? Is there anybody who doesn't remember that stuff? All right, sounds good to me. So they're diploid cells, and the oogonia here, which are diploid, are going to replicate to form more oogonia. Wonderful, right? Now, every time the oogonium replicates by mitosis, Remember, mitosis gives you two cells that have the exact same DNA. So it goes through mitosis, you get another oogonia here, and you get a second one over here. The second oogonia then undergoes differentiation, right? And during differentiation, it becomes a primary oocyte. Remember, primary means one, the first, right? So it becomes a primary oocyte. And the second oogonia just replicates to make more oogonia and more primary oocytes, right? And once you get your primary oocyte, and this is in prophase 1, so this is in the first stage of the first division of mitosis, the egg just stops dividing. So it starts off prophase and ends in prophase while you're still in the womb. Once the female is born, nothing really happens, right? It still remains inactive until, of course, the female hits puberty. Now, during puberty, with all the hormones kicking around, the primary oocyte is now going to mature. Cells around it that are called follicles are going to cause that oocyte to mature, right? And as it matures, it gets bigger, it gets more structured. It starts to store carbohydrates and proteins inside of it, waiting for a time when it can combine with another cell, right? So this is your primary oocyte. Eventually, that primary oocyte is going to undergo a division. So remember, we started at prophase 1. And of course, I'm sure, hopefully everybody remembers, only meiosis has 2 stages. So if you're at prophase 1, it means you're at prophase 1 of meiosis. So now, you're going to have the prophase 1 of meiosis completing. Normally in prophase 1 of meiosis, you get 2 cells that are the same size. Both of the genes in them are different, but the cells should be the same size. However, in oogenesis, you get one huge cell after the end of meiosis 1, and you get one tiny cell with a nucleus in there called a polar body. And this is the first polar body, all right? I'm moving what I said to you sounds familiar, right? Now, the cell that we have over here now, the one that got most of the cytoplasm and other things when the cell replicated, this one is called, of course, your secondary oocyte. And this is the one that is released during ovulation, okay? So what is the purpose of all of this? You probably know this, but let's make sure. The only thing the sperm really contributes towards the development and fertilization process is the nucleus, the sperm nucleus. The sperm doesn't pay child support. It doesn't give any nutrients or anything like that to the egg cell, right? So the egg cell, single mother, she got to do it all by herself, right? So the egg cell has to have enough resources to keep itself alive while it is fertilized and starts replicating. So because of that now, when you're dividing in at meiosis 1, you designate one of the 2 cells. You said this one is going to be the secondary oocyte. You then take all the resources from the second cell and pile it into the first one so that it has enough for when it is going to replicate. Which is why, of course, you end up with one cell that is full of nutrients, which is the secondary oocyte, and another cell with basically nothing in there except the nucleus, called the first polar body, right? Now, once you ovulate that secondary oocyte, of course, several things can happen. One, and hopefully this is the one that happens to the rest of you, to all of you, at least for the next year or two, is that the egg cell, that secondary oocyte, meets no sperm. It doesn't get fertilized, right? Now, here's the thing, and I'm sure you all know this already, right? Fertilization must occur in your fallopian tube, right? So somewhere between here so and here so, the egg must get fertilized. It can't get fertilized down here so. Here's the reason why. That fertilized egg, right, has to change position. It has to move now. So as it gets fertilized, as it floats along, it moves down, and slowly it shifts its position upwards, and so it eventually ends up embedding in the upper part of the lining of the uterus. And once the fertilized egg gets there, you're now pregnant, right? If the egg gets fertilized further down, it can't change position fast enough, and it ends up leaving the body, okay? So you must fertilize the egg further up in the fallopian tube, or else you will simply not get pregnant, right? All right, hopefully that makes sense. Now, assuming the egg gets fertilized, and as we say, higher up on the fallopian tube, when the egg and sperm combine, you are going to now you're going to finish off meiosis by meiosis 2, right? What I should mention, though, and I did mention, is that the secondary oocyte, so it finishes prophase, meiosis 1, but in it itself stops at metaphase 2. So that's the second metaphase in meiosis. It only finishes meiosis 2 after it's fertilized. So when the egg meets the sperm and the sperm nucleus gets into the egg cell, it triggers the completion of meiosis. And during that process, the cell gets big again, piles up plenty of resources, then you split it. All of the resources go towards one cell. This includes, of course, your diploid nucleus. The other cell, just like the first polar body, gets nothing. So this one is our second polar body. So that one just degenerates. It really doesn't serve any purpose. So our fertilized ovum now, which remember now contains the DNA from the mother in the ovary, DNA from the father, from the sperm cell. That is now a diploid cell. And that ovum now is what will embed in the lining of the uterus, right? All right. Any questions there? Anything that sounds a little weird? Anything you want me to repeat? Okay. All right, good. So let me just mention some numbers here. During the second trimester, right? The female will make somewhere around 1 to 2 million eggs. Right? So remember now, female is still in her mother's womb. This is in second trimester. She will make millions of eggs. Right? But by the time the female is born, they have around 600,000 to 800,000 eggs. So 700,000 is a reasonable estimate, right? So you go from having over 1 million of the things you one could have populated a whole country to having 700,000. And that still not like plenty, right? By the time the female hits puberty, she's down to less than 400,000 eggs, which still sounds like a lot. Don't get me wrong. But you went from having millions of eggs before you're born to having several 100,000 after you're born to having just a few 100,000 by the time you're actually ready to use those eggs. Once again, this is a very wasteful process. You're wasting all of these eggs, right? Now, it mentions here that at puberty, follicle-stimulating hormone is going to cause the primary oocyte to start to develop. Remember I said to you that the oocyte is surrounded by a follicle, right? Something kind of like that. It's embedded in the follicle. And this follicle here is when they start producing, well, follicle-stimulating hormone, I should say, will cause the follicle here to mature the egg cell. So you need FSH to cause the maturation of your egg. And once the egg matures, of course, at that point it can split, right? So FSH is required, therefore, for the production of your egg cell, okay? Now, I mentioned secondary oocyte already, so good. So the relevant information is here. So please make sure you go back through it when we're done and you understand what is going on, right? Now, as it says here, the primary follicle becomes a secondary follicle when a fluid-filled cavity forms. So remember, once again, the follicle refers to the cells that are clustered around the egg. When they're very tightly packed in, as a primary follicle, everybody touching. As the follicle matures, it gets bigger, it gets big enough that the egg cells is big enough to start floating in the middle of this ball of cells. And at that time, now you become a secondary follicle, right? And eventually now your egg cell ends up sitting on a stalk in the middle of this fluid-filled cavity. That now is when you become a Graafian follicle. And the Graafian follicle will eventually lead to ovulation, right? So if you look here, we're just going to trace the development. So remember now, our primordial follicles here are around the primary follicles. So the primary oocytes, I should say, are surrounded by the primary follicles. So this is happening before you're born, remember. Then now, once puberty kicks in and the hormones start to flow, FSH causes now the follicle around the egg cell to start to develop. So you go from a primary follicle and you start to mature. And as you're maturing, the oocyte itself is maturing as well. Egg cell is getting larger, starting to store resources. And as the cell is continually exposed to the follicle-stimulating hormone, eventually it develops into the secondary follicle. And you can see here that you can see the space in it. But you can notice here that the egg cell looks like it's trapped in the middle. But with further development now, you end up now with an egg cell inside what amounts to a little bowl. And if you notice finally here, with continuous FSH, you end up with a stalk with the egg cell at the end of it. So don't forget, this is the egg cell here. Surrounded by fluid. And the fluid-filled space here is called an antrum. Right? Now, the reason you put this thing on a stalk is so you can throw it out, basically. So eventually, ovulation occurs. During ovulation, the follicle bursts and the fluid in the antrum drains out and the egg or ovum is released. That is essentially ovulation. But what's left of the follicle still has a use. It's not there for nothing, right? What is left of the follicle is going to develop now into the corpus luteum. And the corpus luteum is very, very important for the production of progesterone, okay? Now, y'all know what estrogen does from C-sec. Everybody knows that estrogen causes the endometrium to thicken. Estrogen prepares the ovaries or causes the ovary to prepare for ovulation, right? Now, progesterone also helps to thicken the uterine lining, right? Which is the endometrium, of course, but it also helps to maintain it. So the estrogen, remember, helps the endometrium to thicken. Progesterone further helps the endometrium to thicken, and it also maintains the endometrium so it doesn't fall apart, right? So it's doing two things. And it only does that after the formation of the corpus luteum, because the corpus luteum, remember, is where the progesterone is coming from. Now, generally speaking, if there's no fertilization happening, if no egg embeds itself in the endometrium after 5 days, the corpus luteum starts to break down. So it starts to form something called a corpus albicans as it is falling apart. And the level of production of progesterone starts to drop like crazy, right? So does estrogen levels start to drop. And when this happens, the endometrium, which you spent all of this time maintaining, can't maintain anymore because you need the progesterone to keep it functional. When that goes, the endometrium falls apart. Remember, once again, the endometrium is the lining of your uterus, right? So remember, here's the endometrium. Without the progesterone, this part of the uterus here, which is the functional endometrium, starts to break apart and starts to move into the uterus. And as it breaks apart, you get a lot of tissue from the endometrium, you get a lot of tissue fluid from the endometrium, and you get a little bit of blood. But of course, the blood stains everything, so it all looks red. So what I'm describing, of course, is the beginning of the menstrual period, of the menstrual cycle, okay? Now, it usually lasts about 2 to 3 days. I'm sure everybody knows that, right? I mean, that is about average, right? And that said, 3 to 4 days is still considered normal. Anything over 4 days is an abnormally long period. It does happen to women.
Sir, can you repeat that?
2 to 3 days is normal. 3 to 4 days is on the high end of normal. Anything above 4 days is abnormal.
So, sir, you're saying that my menstrual cycle is abnormal?
I've never met it. I don't know.
Jesus.
You haven't told me how long it is. I wouldn't know.
But, sir, so like 5-6 days
Oh,
is
no, that's
abnormal?
abnormal. Yeah, man. Your menstrual cycle is supposed to last a week. It's supposed to start.
Sorry, I know the majority of female menstrual cycle lasts.
It's supposed to
But
start
like
Monday.
5-6
It's supposed to
days,
start Friday and
but
done by Monday.
sir, that not right. That
Right?
happened to
It's
me.
not about right, it's about norm. Right? Most females around the world, 2 to 3 days on the low end, 3 to 4 days on the high end. It's not supposed to last 5 days normally.
Sir, the half of the population is abnormal then.
By the way, Jamaican women do have some serious uterine abnormalities. But one of the highest rates of uterine cysts and ovarian cysts and these kind of things. Right? So yeah, for some reason, Jamaican women have a lot of uterine and ovarian problems. This might be one of the reasons why the average in Jamaica is so skewed. But I'm telling you, that's not normal. Right? That's not normal. It's also not normal for the menses to be continuously heavy for the 3 days. Right? It's supposed to start out fairly light, get heavy in the middle, and then get progressively get lighter towards the end. Right?
So, sir, that means something wrong with all of it then, as females, majority of we.
Once again, you're making me speculate because I don't know what you mean, right? Okay. When we're gonna do menstrual cycle in a little bit, but I'm telling you, if it's like 5 days and that happens all the time, that's too much, right? It is. Anyway, now what this diagram is showing you is what happens after the egg is fertilized, right? So let me get my pen. All right. So as first of all, remember I said to you earlier that your best bet is for the egg and sperm to meet higher up in the fallopian tube, okay? If it doesn't, it will end up not being able to embed itself in the wall and it'll get washed out. So let's assume the egg and sperm meet up here, so okay? So the egg gets fertilized here, and now the egg travels down the fallopian tube from there. It normally takes about 2 days or so for the egg to make its way down the fallopian tube and enter the uterus, okay? During that time, that fertilized egg goes through multiple mitotic divisions. So you go from 1 cell to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16, etc., until eventually you form a ball of cells called a blastocyst. So it's hollow on the inside. But of course, all the cells are tiny, right? As you can see here, the blastocyst is not much bigger than your starting cell. Because even though you're replicating a lot, the cells are tiny, tiny. This blastocyst now is going to embed itself in the endometrium, right? And from there now, you're going to have now the production of the progesterone being produced now by the corpus luteum. And the progesterone helps to keep the endometrium intact while the egg implant, while the blastocyst implants itself and starts to set up shop. It has to maintain itself until you can start to get the placenta going, and the placenta will then take over and start producing progesterone. That's one of the major things that the placenta does. It produces estrogen and progesterone that maintains the lining of the endometrium while the fetus is developing. Okay? So the corpus luteum doesn't last very long. Eventually, the placenta has to take over. Now, so this is just showing you here, but in terms of the days it takes, and shows the development. I just go straight to blastocyst. I'm not too interested in the morula right now. The morula is this. This sphere of densely packed cells. It's not super important. It doesn't really do anything much. The blastocyst, of course, is the final stage that we're interested in before you get into the uterus, right? So this one slide is not super important to us. Oh my goodness, time is running. I want to get to slide 20 at least, right? So I mentioned fimbriae already, so I won't do that again. So this is looking now at the sections of the uterus in a bit more detail, right? So I mentioned to you endometrium already. As we know, that's where you actually get the actual menses from. Myometrium. Now, well, let me ask that question again. What percentage of women do you think have period pains?
Sir, probably 80% of we like
90%.
Are you 80%? Are you 90%? Wow, okay. That is high. Right? 20% of women have no pain at all. Right? They have no pain at all. If it was for the leaking, they wouldn't even realize what was going on. Around that 10% or so have very mild discomfort. They hardly notice it. Right? Which means, of course, only around 65-70% of women have noticeable pain during their menstrual cycle. But y'all telling me 80-90%. Because once again, in Jamaica, it seems to be a little higher than normal. So higher than normal length, higher than normal pain. Interesting, right? We need to do our study. Anyway, so the myometrium is one of the reasons why you get pain during the menstrual cycle. The myometrium is smooth muscle, and its job is to help. Well, it has two jobs. When you're in labor, it helps to push the baby out. But when you're not in labor, when you're having a menstrual cycle, the myometrium is designed to contract and relax rapidly to break up the endometrium so it can get flushed out. And when this muscle is contracting and relaxing over and over and over again, sometimes it picks up a cramp.
Damn.
Cramp, right?
Okay.
So that severe cramp, of course, is coming from the myometrium. Now, because the myometrium is a smooth muscle, the myometrium is susceptible to two things: pressure and warmth. If you are somebody who gets severe cramps, a hot water bottle helps.
Sir, that's what I have to use like every single month.
One heating pad.
There you go.
Right.
Something warm. The warmth forces the muscle to relax somewhat, right? Another thing you can do is abdominal massage, right? If somebody presses the abdominal muscles near there and puts enough pressure, the pressure gets passed to the endometrial muscles, to the myometrium, sorry. And that constant force during the massage will help to cause it to relax as well, right? Otherwise, you could go for a walk. Yes, I say go for a walk. Going for a
Sir,
walk
that
helps.
don't work.
Going for a
That-
walk helps. All the
Sir,
stuff
because
helps.
foot pain, I have all type of pain. How many? Sir, we can't even get up.
So I tried going for a walk and almost fainted.
Oh Jesus.
So go back inside.
That now work.
But
What?
but hold on, if you just lie there, it makes it worse, right? The general thought on the matter is that you have to move around. If you don't, the pain is gonna get worse
Sir, that
Sir,
my
you
mother
have a
always
mind.
say. Mother will
because
say,
it
"One, what to do?"
stretches the myometrium.
Sir, you not understand.
No, I
You're
do
a
not.
man.
Sir,
I'm in full
my
agreement. I don't understand. But hold on, you just said to me, that's what your mother tell you. So she don't understand either.
No, sir. She understanding us, sir.
Yeah, and she tell you about walk too.
But boy,
my netball coach told me to exercise one time.
It is not an unreasonable statement.
The only movement we do, sir, is lay in bed and roll. That's all we do.
Which is why it's so bad for so long. It's like when you have a cramp in your ankle. You just lay down there and take it, or you try to walk it out.
All right.
I'm just saying. I mean, your mother has a point, right? And even professional female athletes will tell you when they have them cramps, they go and exercise and they feel better. But obviously, I'm only speaking from somebody else's experience, right? All right. The outermost layer is now the perimetrium. This is mostly connective tissue. And of course, it is a serous membrane, right? All right. I'm going to stop here because we still haven't looked at the tutorial yet. I will pick up the rest of these slides next week. Well, next week. All right, so we stop. And instead, let us look at our tutorial. I don't think that we have time to have digital. But let's do at least the multiple choice, and then I'll try to probably run through the structured part in the class, in the lecture. All right. To save time, let me just answer the questions for you. Because I know, as I said, I haven't, I've left it open until tomorrow, so some of you might not have finished it yet. All right. Blank is the first step of urine formation. Water and certain dissolved substances are filtered out of capillaries. That, of course, is going to be filtration, right? The function unit of a kidney, I don't need to go any further, we know that's a nephron. Hollow distensible muscular organ that stores urine. Nice, easy one, that has to be your bladder.
Yes, sir, you made a mistake with the question. You didn't put it as an option.
What, there's no bladder here?
But not like A, B, or C, they
Oh,
beside
you
it. So
see
what
the
I did
bladder?
was to just circle it.
Oh, I see what happened. It should have been an A, B, C, D, E question.
Yeah.
Oh, it missed it. Yeah, it should
But I
be here.
just underline it or circle it.
Yeah, you're correct to do so. Tube that carries urine from the kidney to the bladder, of course, is the ureter. triangular shaped structure located in the renal medulla